The metal door tore open before I even heard the warning siren finish its first cycle. Cold air rushed into the cabin, carrying the smell of burnt wiring, and something sharp, almost metallic, like ozone after a storm. I was sitting near the back of the transport, my boots resting on the seat in front of me, when the boarding party dropped through the breach one after another. 6 of them. Tall, gray-skinned, armored in plates that shimmered faintly blue under the emergency lighting. Everyone around me screamed. A woman named Grace Whitfield grabbed her son and pulled him under the seat. An older man near the front tried to run toward the cockpit and was shoved back down by one of the armored figures without a single word spoken. I did not move. I was watching. That was all. Watching the way they moved, the way their weapons were held, the way their eyes, if you could call them that, scanned the room like they were counting heads for a harvest. The one in front, the one with darker plating and a symbol on his shoulder that looked like a jagged circle, stepped forward. He was clearly the one in charge. His steps were slow, deliberate, meant to make us feel small before he even said a word. He raised his weapon and pointed it directly at me. I do not know why he chose me out of everyone else on that transport. Maybe it was because I was not screaming. Maybe it was because I was not shaking. Or maybe he simply liked the idea of making an example out of the first person who did not react the way he expected. I looked at the weapon. It hummed faintly, a soft blue light building somewhere near the barrel. It looked expensive. It looked like it was built to end a life in less time than it takes to blink. I reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and smiled. Not a big smile, just enough to let him see it. The reaction from his crew was immediate. 2 of them exchanged a glance. One of them actually took half a step back, as if my smile alone had told him something his scanners had not. The commander's translator crackled, converting his words into something close to our language. His voice came out flat, mechanical, filtered through hardware that stripped away any real emotion. "You find this amusing," he said. "A little," I answered. Someone behind me whispered my name, quiet and scared. Daniel Cross, one of the cargo handlers, who had boarded the transport with me 2 days earlier. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. Maybe I had, or maybe I simply understood something he did not. The commander stepped closer, the tip of his weapon now inches from my forehead. "On this ship," he said, "your species does not get to smile at me." I tilted my head slightly, studying him the way you might study an animal that thinks it is dangerous, because nothing has ever challenged it before. "You're new to this side of the galaxy," I said, "aren't you?" His posture shifted, just barely. It was a small thing, the kind of movement you would only notice if you had spent your whole life reading body language as a survival skill. But I noticed it. He had not expected me to speak so calmly. He had expected fear, the kind that makes people beg, or freeze, or cry. Instead, I sat there with my boots still resting on the seat in front of me, adjusting a second strand of hair that had fallen loose, watching him, the way you would watch a storm approaching from a safe distance, curious more than afraid. "Where is this ship traveling?" he asked. "What is your cargo manifest, your codes, your defense grid coordinates?" "I don't know any of that," I said honestly. "I'm not the pilot." "Then you are useless to me." "Maybe," I said, "but I wouldn't put that gun so close to my face if I were you." The words came out simple, almost gentle, but something about the way I said them made the air in the cabin shift. Grace Whitfield, still crouched with her son, looked up at me like I had just said something insane. Daniel's breathing had gone quiet, like he was holding it entirely. The commander laughed. It came through the translator as a strange, broken sound, half static and half something that might have been genuine amusement. "You are threatening me," he said. "A creature with no weapon, no armor, no shield. Threatening me." "I didn't say I was threatening you," I replied. "I said you wouldn't want to do that. There's a difference." One of his crew members, a shorter one, standing near the breach point, was looking down at a small device strapped to his forearm. Its screen glowed faintly, and his posture had gone tense in a way that had nothing to do with me directly. He said something to the commander in their own language, quick and clipped, the kind of tone that suggested urgency. The commander did not look away from me. "Ignore the scan," he said. "It is reading errors. This one is small, unarmed, insignificant." But the crew member said something else, more insistent this time. and I caught one word, repeated twice through the translator static, before it cut out entirely. The word sounded like it meant anomaly. I kept my expression calm, almost bored, though inside I was doing what I always did in moments like this. I was counting. Distance to the nearest wall, weight of the weapon in his hand, the gap between his fingers and the trigger guard, the way his stance was slightly too wide, slightly too confident, the stance of someone who had never once been challenged and did not know what it felt like to be wrong. "You people," the commander said, turning his attention back to the rest of the cabin, raising his voice so the translator could broadcast to everyone, "come from a planet your own species calls unlivable. A planet with gravity 3 times what a normal body could withstand. Predators larger than your transport ships. Storms that would tear apart cities on gentler worlds. And yet you send your weakest, your civilians, out into the stars unprotected." "We're not unprotected," I said quietly. He turned back to me, the barrel of his weapon still hovering near my face. "You have no armor," he said. "No shield, no visible weapon." "I didn't say I had a weapon," I said. "I said we're not unprotected. Those aren't the same thing." For a moment, nobody spoke. The hum of his weapon seemed louder in the silence, that soft blue light, pulsing steadily, waiting. I thought about my childhood then, though I did not say any of it aloud. I thought about the storms that used to roll over our settlement twice a season. Storms strong enough to lift loose structures off their foundations. Storms we learned to read in the sky the way other children learn to read picture books. I thought about the long nights spent listening for the low call of predators that hunted in the dark hills beyond the fence line, predators that could break through reinforced doors if you were not fast enough to seal them shut in time. I thought about the first time I had to carry my little brother 2 miles through freezing rain, because the transport meant to collect us never arrived, and how by the time I turned 12, none of that felt unusual anymore. It simply felt like being alive. None of that was worth explaining to a man holding a gun to my head. Not yet. Instead, I looked at him and said, "You should really lower that." "Or what?" he said, his voice sharpening. I did not answer right away. I let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of it, let him wonder. Then I gave him the smallest shrug, the kind of gesture that said I genuinely did not care what he chose to do next, because whatever it was, I already knew how it would end. "Or you'll find out something your scanners have already been trying to tell you," I said, glancing toward the crew member with the device still glowing on his arm. "And I don't think you're going to like the answer." The commander's grip on the weapon tightened. For one long second, I thought he might actually pull the trigger simply out of frustration, simply because a moment like this demanded some kind of reaction from him in front of his own crew. Instead, he lowered the weapon slightly, not out of mercy, but out of something closer to suspicion. His attention shifted toward the device on his crew member's arm, and he barked a short command in their language. The crew member hesitated before answering, his voice lower this time, almost reluctant. Whatever he said made the commander go still. I adjusted my hair again, tucking the last loose strand behind my ear, and allowed myself the smallest, calmest smile I had given yet, because I already knew exactly what that scanner was trying to tell him. It was trying to tell him that he had pointed his weapon at the wrong kind of human. The commander's crew member with the glowing device took 2 steps back before he caught himself, straightening his posture as if embarrassed by his own reaction. The commander noticed. Of course he noticed. Commanders like him noticed everything except the one thing that mattered most, which was that fear, once it starts moving through a room, does not stop simply because someone orders it to. "Explain the reading," the commander said, his voice sharp enough now that even the translator could not fully soften it. The crew member glanced at me, then back at his commander. "Bone density," he said. "Muscle fiber composition. Reaction speed. All 3 are outside every recorded range for this species classification. Recalibrate the scanner," the commander said. I have recalibrated it twice. The commander turned to look at me fully now, his weapon lowered just slightly more, though still close enough that I could feel the faint heat rolling off its barrel. I did not move away from it. I never once considered moving away from it. Moving away would have told him I was afraid, and fear was the one currency I had learned, a long time ago, never to spend unless I had no other choice. "What are you?" he asked. "A passenger," I said. "Same as everyone else on this transport." "You are not the same," he said. The scan says otherwise. I shrugged, the motion slow and unbothered. The kind of shrug you give when someone asks a question you have answered 100 times before, and grown tired of explaining. I'm from a colony called Cairo, I said. You've probably never heard of it. Most people who haven't been there call it a Deathworld. We call it home. The word Deathworld did something to the room. I watched it ripple through the crew, watched two of them exchange another glance, watched the shorter one with the device lower his hand slightly, as if some old instinct told him to keep it close to a weapon he was not even holding. Deathworld, the commander repeated, testing the word the way you test ice on a lake, before deciding whether to walk across it. I have heard the term. Colonial slang for planets deemed unfit for standard settlement protocols. That's the polite version, I said. Explain. I glanced past him, toward Grace Whitfield, who was still crouched low, with her son pressed against her side, both of them watching me with wide eyes, waiting to see if my strange calm was going to get us all hurt, or somehow save us. I gave her the smallest nod, the kind that said stay still, stay quiet, let me handle this, and then I looked back at the commander. When the first settlers arrived on Cairo, I said, the planet's gravity was already known to be higher than standard. Nobody thought that alone would be dangerous. Humans adapt. That's the one thing we've always been good at, but gravity was only the beginning. Continue, the commander said, and for the first time his voice did not sound like an order. It sounded like curiosity, thin and reluctant, the kind that creeps in even when someone does not want to admit they are listening. The storms came first, I said. Not rain, not wind the way you'd think of it. Electrical storms that could strip the paint off a hull in under a minute. We lost an entire early settlement in the first 2 years, not to attack, not to sabotage, just weather. After that, the ones who survived built differently, lower, heavier, buried half our homes into the ground because anything standing tall enough to catch the wind eventually came down. I paused, letting that settle, watching the crew member with the device glance down at his readout again, as if searching for numbers that could somehow make what I was saying less true. Then there were the things that lived in the hills, I continued. We call them ridge stalkers, big animals, faster than they look, quiet until they're not. They hunt in groups, and they learned early on that human settlements meant food that didn't fight back. So we learned to fight back. You fought them, the commander said. We had to, I said. There wasn't a rescue fleet coming. There wasn't a peacekeeping force stationed nearby to call in when things went wrong. If a ridge stalker got through the fence line at night, somebody had to deal with it before it reached the children's shelter. That somebody was usually whoever was closest, whether that was a fully grown adult or someone barely tall enough to reach the top shelf in the supply room. I let that last part hang in the air for a moment before I said the rest, because I wanted him to understand it fully, not just hear it. I was 9 years old the first time I had to do that, I said. Not because anyone thought a 9-year-old should be doing it. Because there was no one else close enough, and waiting for someone else meant my little brother didn't wake up the next morning. The cabin had gone completely silent except for the low hum of the ship's damaged systems somewhere behind the breach point. Even Daniel Cross, who had been holding his breath through most of the conversation, seemed to have stopped entirely. The commander studied me for a long moment, his weapon now lowered almost to his side, though his grip on it had not loosened. You are describing survival, he said, not strength. On Cairo, I said, they're the same thing. He shook his head slightly, a gesture I recognized even across species, the universal motion of someone trying to dismiss information that unsettled them. Every colony has hardship stories, he said. It does not explain the readings my crew member is showing me. Then let me explain those too, I said. Give a body enough years of higher gravity, and bones don't just adapt, they thicken. Give it enough years of needing to move fast enough to avoid something that wants to eat you, and reflexes don't just improve, they rewire. Give it enough years of healing from injuries with no advanced medical center within 100 miles, and the body finds ways to recover that would look impossible anywhere else in the galaxy. I lifted one hand slowly, palm open, non-threatening, simply to make a point rather than a move, and I saw two of the crew members tense anyway, weapons twitching upward before they caught themselves. That's not a threat, I said calmly. That's just an old scar. I turned my forearm slightly, showing a thin pale line running from wrist to elbow, faded with age but still visible if you knew what you were looking for. Ridge Stalker Claw, I said. I was 11. It should have taken the whole arm. Healed in 6 weeks with nothing but field stitches and my grandmother's home remedies, because the nearest hospital was an 8-hour flight away, and the storms had grounded every transport that season. The commander's translator crackled again, as he exchanged a low exchange with the crew member holding the scanner. I could not understand the words, but I understood the tone. The particular strain of a leader, trying to sound unbothered, while quietly recalculating everything he thought he knew. This is one account, he finally said, turning back to me. One colony. It does not represent your entire species. You're right, I said. It doesn't. There are dozens of colonies like Caro scattered across human space. Some worse, some better. Every single one of them sent their people out here anyway, into ships, into trade routes, into contact with species like yours, because Deathworlders don't wait around to be told the galaxy is dangerous. We already know it is. We grew up in the dangerous part. I could see it working on him, the way information sometimes works on people who have spent their whole lives being the strongest thing in every room they walked into. It does not collapse all at once. It cracks slowly, quietly, in places they do not expect. You still have not answered the only question that matters, he said, raising the weapon again, though this time with noticeably less certainty behind the motion. Why are you not afraid of me? I considered the question honestly, because it deserved an honest answer, not a clever one. I didn't say I wasn't afraid, I said. I said I wasn't going to show it. On Caro, the moment a predator sees you panic, that's the moment it decides your prey. Doesn't matter how big it is or how big you are. Panic is the only signal it's really looking for. I stopped giving that signal a long time ago, because giving it never once helped me survive anything. The commander's grip on the weapon tightened again, and for a moment, I thought I had pushed him somewhere he did not want to be pushed, somewhere between curiosity and humiliation, the exact place where dangerous men tend to do the most dangerous things. You compare me to an animal, he said, his voice lower now, edged with something colder. I didn't, I said. You did that yourself. The moment you decided pointing a gun at an unarmed woman would make you look strong in front of your crew. Behind him, the crew member with the scanner had gone very still, staring down at his readout with an expression that, even filtered through an alien face, looked unmistakably like dread. He said something quiet, urgent, and this time the translator caught enough of it for me to understand the shape of the warning, even without every word. Something about updated threat classifications. Something about outdated field manuals. Something about a report that should have reached Fleet Command months ago and never had. The commander did not look at his crew member this time. He kept his eyes on me, and I watched something shift behind them, some old certainty giving way to a question he clearly did not want to be asking himself in front of the people he commanded. I reached up and adjusted my hair one more time, calm and unhurried, and let the smallest smile return to my face. You should really listen to him, I said quietly, before you do something you can't take back. Pride is a strange thing. I had seen it before, back home, in men and women who refused to run from a ridge stalker because running felt like admitting weakness, and more than a few of them did not live long enough to regret that choice. Pride does not listen to warnings. Pride listens to itself, and only to itself, right up until the moment it cannot anymore. The commander's jaw tightened, a small motion, but barely visible, but I had spent my whole life reading small motions, because small motions were usually the only warning you got, before something much bigger happened. You think a translated warning from a nervous subordinate changes anything, he said, his voice dropping into something colder, something that had stopped pretending to be curious. I am the one holding the weapon. You are, I agreed. Then perhaps, he said, stepping closer, close enough now that I could see the faint mechanical seams along his jaw, where his helmet met his skin. It is time I remind this cabin exactly what that means. He moved fast, faster than I expected from someone his size, faster than the lazy confidence in his earlier steps had suggested. The back of his gloved hand caught me across the cheek before I had fully registered the motion, a sharp, stinging blow, meant to snap my head sideways, meant to draw blood, meant to finally get the reaction he had been waiting for, since the moment he stepped through that breach. My head did turn. The sting was real, spreading warm across my cheek, and for one heartbeat the cabin held its breath along with me. Then I turned my head back toward him, slow and deliberate, and I was still smiling. Not the calm little smile from before. Something sharper now. Something that had teeth in it, even though my mouth stayed closed. "That's the second thing you shouldn't have done," I said quietly. Grace Whitfield let out a small, strangled sound from where she was crouched, and I heard Daniel Cross whisper something that might have been my name, or might have been a prayer. I could not tell which, and it did not matter either way. The commander stared at me, and for the first time, something flickered behind his expression that was not confidence. It was the look of a man who had expected pain, or tears, or begging, and had instead gotten a smile that felt less like defiance and more like a countdown. "You find pain amusing as well," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "I find it familiar," I said. "Ridge stalkers hit harder than that when they're just testing whether you'll run. You didn't even leave a mark that will still be there tomorrow." That was true. On Caro, a blow like that would barely register as an inconvenience, something you shook off between one breath and the next, the kind of impact our bodies had long since stopped treating as anything worth reacting to. I could feel the heat already fading from my cheek, the sting dulling faster than it should have for anyone standing in that cabin who was not built the way I was built. The crew member with the scanner said something else, faster this time, more urgent, his voice climbing in pitch even through the flat filter of the translator. I caught fragments again. Pain response absent, recovery rate abnormal, recommend immediate disengagement. The commander ignored him entirely, his focus narrowing onto me the way a predator's focus narrows when it has decided, right or wrong, that backing down now would cost it something it cannot afford to lose in front of an audience. "Perhaps you simply have not understood the situation," he said. "I could end your life in this cabin and face no consequence for it. Not from your government, not from your fleet. There is no fleet. There is no rescue coming for any of you." "You keep saying things like that," I said, "like you think it's supposed to scare me." "It should." "It doesn't," I said, "because you're still missing the actual problem here." "And what problem is that?" I let the question sit for a moment, savoring it slightly, not out of cruelty, but because some lessons only stick if you let a person sit in their own certainty, just long enough to watch it crumble on its own. "The problem," I said, "is that you're standing close enough to me right now, that if I decided to stop being patient, your crew wouldn't reach you in time to stop what happens next." The cabin went utterly silent. Even the low mechanical hum from the breached hull seemed to fade into the background, swallowed by the sheer stillness of everyone waiting to see what the commander would do with a statement like that. He laughed again, that broken half-static sound from before, but there was less confidence in it this time, more forced, more like a man trying to convince himself of something, rather than convince the room. "You are unarmed," he said. "I told you already," I said, keeping my voice calm, almost gentle, the same tone you might use to explain something simple to a child who refused to understand it the first 3 times. "I never said I had a weapon. I said we weren't unprotected. You still haven't figured out what that actually means, have you?" His grip on the weapon tightened again, and this time, I saw his fingers shift closer to the trigger, no longer resting lazily against the guard, but curling in toward it, the posture of a man who had decided, somewhere in the last several seconds, that pride was worth more than caution. The scanner crew member shouted something now, no longer bothering with careful phrasing, and the translator, straining to keep pace, delivered it in fragmented pieces. "Field manual update. Species reclassification. Confirmed multiple incidents. Do not engage." "Enough," the commander barked, and for a moment I thought the order was meant for me. It was not. It was meant for his own crew, silencing the one voice in the room that had been right about everything since the very first scan. He raised the weapon fully now, leveling it directly at my forehead, his hands steady despite the tension humming through every other part of his posture. "I do not care what your scanner claims," he said. "I do not care what stories this creature tells about storms and predators and children fighting monsters in the dark. I have faced down species far larger than yours, far stronger, far more heavily armed. A soft-skinned mammal from a backwater colony does not frighten me." "I'm not trying to frighten you," I said quietly. "I already told you that too. I'm trying to give you a chance to walk away from this the same way you walked in." And if I choose not to take that chance? I looked at him, steady, unblinking, and I let the last trace of gentleness drain out of my voice entirely, replacing it with something colder, something that had been sitting quietly beneath the surface since the moment his boarding party first tore through that hull. Then you'll finally understand, I said, why they call it a Deathworld. The weapon's hum shifted, that soft blue light along the barrel brightening, building toward whatever discharge it was designed to deliver. His finger tightened against the trigger. Somewhere behind him, the scanner crew member had gone completely rigid, one hand half raised as if to physically pull his commander back, though he did not dare actually touch him. I did not close my eyes. I did not flinch. I did not brace the way a frightened person braces, shoulders hunching, breath catching, body curling instinctively away from danger. I simply watched him, calm and steady, my weight already shifting subtly onto the balls of my feet, my hands relaxed at my sides, in a stance that looked passive, but was anything but. Every second that passed felt stretched thin, the way seconds always did in moments like this, the kind of moments I had lived through more times than I could count back on Caro, standing between a threat and the people I was responsible for keeping alive. The commander's arm trembled, almost imperceptibly, the first true crack in his composure since he had boarded that transport. "You should be afraid," he said, and this time his voice was quieter, almost as if he were saying it more for himself than for me. "I told you already," I said softly. "I am. I just decided a long time ago that fear doesn't get to decide what I do next." His finger pressed down, and in that same instant, before the weapon's charge could fully release, I moved. I had spent years training my body to move faster than thought could keep up with, the kind of training that starts the moment you are old enough to understand that hesitation gets people killed. On Caro, you do not have the luxury of deciding whether to act. You act, and you think about it afterward, once you are still alive to do the thinking. My hand closed around the weapon's barrel before the discharge could fully form, my fingers wrapping around the heated metal and twisting it sharply upward and to the side. The blue light released harmlessly into the ceiling of the cabin, scorching a black mark into the metal above us instead of into me. The commander's arm, still connected to the weapon, was dragged along with the motion, his balance breaking in a way he clearly had never experienced before, not from anything smaller than himself. He staggered forward half a step, and I used that half step against him, pivoting my weight and driving my shoulder into his chest plate, not with wild force, not with panic, but with the same measured precision I had used 100 times before, against something far larger and far hungrier than any single alien commander. He stumbled back into the bulkhead behind him, the impact rattling loose panels along the wall, his weapon clattering from his grip and skidding across the floor toward the front of the cabin. The rest of his crew reacted a half-second too late, weapons raising, boots shifting forward, voices rising in a mix of alarm and confusion. But I was already moving again, faster than their training had apparently prepared them for, closing the distance to the commander before he could fully regain his footing. I did not strike him again. I did not need to. Instead, I caught his wrist as he tried to reach for a secondary weapon at his side, twisting it at an angle that made him freeze completely, rather than risk further injury, and pressed him back against the bulkhead with just enough controlled pressure to keep him there, without causing any real harm. "Don't," I said quietly, my voice calm, even though my heart was pounding steadily in my chest, adrenaline sharp and clean, the familiar feeling of a threat being handled, rather than a threat being escaped. "You really don't want your crew to see what happens if you make me finish this." The cabin had gone completely silent again, except now the silence carried a different weight entirely. Grace Whitfield had risen slightly from her crouch, staring at me with wide eyes, her son peeking out from behind her arm. Daniel Cross had not moved at all, frozen in place, his mouth slightly open as if he had started to say something and simply forgotten how to finish it. The 5 remaining crew members stood frozen as well, weapons half raised, clearly uncertain whether firing on me would save their commander, or simply provoke something worse. Their scanner readings, whatever they had shown moments earlier, had apparently done nothing to prepare them for actually witnessing what those numbers meant. "Lower your weapons," I said, my tone even, almost gentle, the same voice I might have used calming a spooked animal back home. "Nobody else needs to get hurt today. Your commander is going to be fine. He's just going to stand here quietly for a moment while we all take a breath." None of them moved. I did not blame them. It is one thing to read a threat assessment on a screen, quite another to watch the person you serve under get handled so easily by something your own species had spent generations dismissing as harmless. The commander, still pinned lightly against the bulkhead, made a small sound, something between frustration and disbelief, his uninjured hand curling into a fist at his side, though he did not attempt to use it. "How?" he said, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier authority. "I told you," I said, more than once. "You just weren't ready to hear it." "This is not possible," he said. "Our records, our threat assessments. Your species was documented as low risk, minimal combat capability, a curiosity, not a concern." "Your records are old," I said. "Older than you probably realize. Humanity didn't send its Deathworlders out into first contact scenarios right away. We kept them close to home for a long time, working the hardest colonies, doing the jobs nobody else could survive. It's only in the last several years that people like me started showing up on trade routes, on transports like this one, out here where you'd actually notice." "Then why," he said, "would your species allow this? Allow us to encounter you unprepared, without proper warning?" I almost laughed at that, though I kept it contained, aware that laughing at him now would only wound his pride further, and a wounded commander with weapons still active around him was not something I wanted to provoke unnecessarily. "Maybe we didn't think it was our job to warn you," I said. "Maybe we figured any species advanced enough to build starships should have figured out on their own that assuming a whole species is harmless, just because a handful of ambassadors seemed easy to handle, was a mistake waiting to happen." His breathing had steadied slightly, though his posture remained tense against the bulkhead, his eyes flicking toward his crew, as if searching for some path back to authority that did not involve admitting exactly how thoroughly this encounter had gone wrong for him. "Release me," he said, "and I will consider this incident resolved without further conflict." "That depends," I said, "on what happens the moment I do." "You have my word." I studied him for a long moment, weighing that offer the way I weighed everything, carefully, without letting emotion push me toward a decision, faster than logic could catch up. Back on Caro, you learned quickly that trusting a threat simply because it promised peace was often how people ended up buried before the next season's storms arrived. But I also understood something else, something that mattered more in that moment than pride or caution. This was not Caro. This was a transport full of frightened, innocent people who needed this situation to end quietly, not escalate into something none of us could walk away from. "Fine," I said, "but your crew lowers their weapons first. All of them, right now." The commander hesitated only a moment before barking a sharp command in his own language. One by one, reluctantly, the 5 remaining crew members lowered their weapons, though none of them looked fully convinced this was the right decision. I released the commander's wrist slowly, stepping back just enough to give him room, though I kept my weight balanced, ready to move again if needed. He straightened his posture, rubbing his wrist gently, his composure returning in pieces, though something in his expression had changed permanently, some deep certainty replaced now by a wariness that had not existed when he first stepped through that breach. He bent down and retrieved his fallen weapon from the floor, and for one tense heartbeat, every person in that cabin, human and alien alike, seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what he would do with it, now that he had it back in his hand. He did not raise it again. Instead, he holstered it slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving mine. "You could have ended this differently," he said, "permanently." "I could have," I agreed, "but that's not who we are. We don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight because sometimes it's the only option left. You gave me one, and I used it exactly as much as I needed to, and not one bit more than that." He was quiet for a long moment, studying me the way you might study something you had misjudged so completely that it forced you to question everything else you thought you understood about the galaxy around you. "What is your name?" he finally asked. I considered not answering. I considered telling him it did not matter, that names were not owed to men who pointed weapons at unarmed passengers and struck them across the face for smiling. But something in his voice had changed, quiet and genuinely curious now rather than commanding, and I decided the answer cost me nothing. "Ellie Bennett," I said. He repeated it softly, almost like he was memorizing it, The way you memorize the name of a storm after it has already passed through and left you standing, shaken but unharmed, wondering how you survived it. The next several minutes passed in a strange, careful quiet, the kind that follows any moment when violence almost happened but did not, when everyone in the room is still recalibrating what they believe is possible. The commander's crew kept their weapons lowered, though their eyes never fully left me, watching the way you watch something you no longer fully understand, something that has stopped fitting neatly into the categories you built your entire worldview around. Grace Whitfield rose fully to her feet now, her son still pressed close against her side, and I gave her a small nod, letting her know it was safe to breathe again. Daniel Cross finally exhaled, running a hand through his hair, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time, despite having spent 2 days working alongside me, without ever once suspecting what I was capable of. The commander straightened his shoulders, some fragment of his earlier authority returning, though it sat differently on him now, quieter, more careful, less certain of its own weight. You said your species does not enjoy conflict, he said, yet you boarded a transport such as this one alone, without protection, into contested trade space. Explain that. I wasn't looking for conflict, I said. I was traveling home. Contracts mostly. Skilled labor postings out on the frontier settlements pay well, and Caro doesn't have an unlimited number of jobs for someone with my particular set of experiences. Sometimes that means traveling through space that isn't entirely safe. That's not something we're afraid of either. You should be, he said, though the words came out less like a threat now, and more like a genuine warning, the kind one might offer a stranger rather than an enemy. There are worse things than my crew out here. I don't doubt that, I said. But I imagine most of them will make the same mistake you did, at least the first time. He studied me for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his expression, before he finally spoke again, his voice quieter, almost thoughtful. Our fleet command will need to be informed of this encounter, he said. The threat classification for your species requires immediate correction. What happened here cannot happen again, not without proper preparation on our part. That sounds like a good idea, I said. You are not concerned, he asked, that informing my superiors of this incident may result in your species being viewed as a greater threat than before. Some among my command may see this as reason to strike first, rather than risk further encounters like this one. I considered that seriously, because it was a fair point, the kind of concern that deserved a real answer, rather than another clever line. Maybe, I said, but I think most species eventually learn the same lesson, one way or another. You can either respect something because you understand it, or you can respect it because it forced you to. Either way, the respect ends up in the same place. I'd rather it happen because you understood, but I'll accept the other version if that's the only one available. The commander nodded slowly, and for the first time since he had boarded that transport, something in his posture shifted into what almost looked like a strange kind of respect, reluctant and unfamiliar, but present all the same. Your transport will be released, he said. Undamaged, your passengers unharmed. I will file my report honestly, including my own error in judgment. It is the only way to ensure others do not repeat it. That's more than fair, I said. He hesitated before turning to leave, glancing back at me one final time. For what it's worth, he said, I do not believe I have ever encountered a species quite like yours. Most people say that eventually, I said, allowing the smallest smile to return, calm and unhurried. It usually takes them a lot longer to say it than it took you. He gave a short nod, something almost respectful in the gesture, before turning and signaling his crew toward the breach point they had entered through. One by one, they filed out, their earlier confidence replaced now with something far more cautious, glancing back at me and the rest of the cabin as they retreated, as if unwilling to fully turn their backs on something they no longer understood well enough to dismiss. The breach sealed itself moments later with a low mechanical groan, emergency systems already working to stabilize the hull, and the tension in the cabin finally broke all at once, passengers exhaling, some crying quietly with relief, others simply sitting in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Grace Whitfield approached me carefully, her son still holding tightly to her hand, and for a moment she simply stared at me, searching for words that did not seem adequate for the situation. How did you, she started, then stopped, shaking her head slightly. I mean, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here. You would have been fine, I said gently. They wanted information, not chaos, but I'm glad it worked out the way it did instead. Daniel Cross finally found his voice as well, though it came out shakier than usual. You've done that before, he said, haven't you? Not exactly that, but something like it. A few times, I admitted. Different threat, same basic idea. You learn to read a situation before it happens, and you learn to end it before it gets any worse than it needs to be. He shook his head slowly, something between disbelief and gratitude settling into his expression. Remind me never to underestimate you, he said. Most people don't get the chance to make that mistake twice, I said, and the corner of my mouth lifted again, calm and easy, though there was nothing cold about it this time, only quiet warmth for the people around me, who had just lived through something they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. I settled back into my seat as the transport systems hummed back toward stability, the emergency lighting shifting slowly back to its normal warm glow, and I reached up one final time, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear, out of habit rather than necessity. Word would travel now. I understood that much clearly. Somewhere out among the stars, a report would be filed, quietly correcting decades of outdated assumptions, and slowly, one encounter at a time, other commanders across other fleets would begin hearing the same story, told a dozen different ways by a dozen different witnesses, always circling back to the same simple truth. They had spent generations believing humanity's homeworld colonies were simply unfortunate, unlucky places, planets too dangerous for comfortable living, populated by people who had drawn the short straw when the stars were divided up among the species reaching for them. They never stopped to consider that maybe, all along, it had never been misfortune at all. Maybe it had always been a warning, quietly written into the very name people used to describe places like Cairo, waiting patiently for the rest of the galaxy to finally understand what it truly meant. Deathworld was never just a description of the land. It was a description of what the land had made of the people who survived it. And somewhere far beyond that transport, drifting quietly through the dark, word of what had happened aboard a small, unremarkable civilian ship was already beginning to spread among the stars, one cautious whisper at a time, carrying with it a single, simple lesson that no fleet command anywhere would be able to ignore for much longer. Never mistake a smile for surrender. Some of us learned a long time ago that the calmest person in the room is usually the one you should have been most afraid of all along.